First of all, I would love to thank all of our co-hosts today, Grace Communications Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Boundless Research and Analytics, the Kroger Zero Hunger Zero Waste Foundation, and the Think Family Foundation. We're very grateful for everyone's support in helping put this together. I'd love to now introduce our moderator for the day, Urvashi Rangan, who's the Chief Science Advisor for Grace Communications Foundation. So I'll let you take it away, Urvashi, and thank you everyone for coming on today.
Great, thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone at ReFed and the team. What a great team. And my name is Urvashi Rangan. I am the Chief Science Advisor for the Grace Communications Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, we have been funding in the food transformation space for quite a few decades now. And our interests have come at food waste really from that perspective, even as far on the outer ring as animal health and welfare, moving into regenerative agriculture. We were one of the first supporters of ReFed, and we're really excited to be a co-sponsor today of this webinar, where I know we're going to get a lot of great information. And maybe just to sort of tee it off, you know, as being involved in the food space for so long, and I'm sure even the climate space, we run up against many who oppose different positions, how we can get to food transformation. What's really interesting about food waste is it's hard to oppose it. We all want better efficiency. We all want less waste. And so it's one of those issues that make it a really good entry point into food, into climate change. And it's also a great way for the public to engage directly in order to make change, and even small changes make a huge difference. So we're really excited to have you here today. And we've got a blend of stakeholders, including funders, food banks, NGOs, and companies who are all involved in this space. And we'll share some perspective with you. We also know that, for example, if all the food waste was tallied up in this country, we'd have enough food to grow on about 80 million acres, and that would take about all the water from California, Texas, and Ohio combined to grow those crops. So it gives you a sense of the totality of this problem and the issues that we face. Next slide, please. Thank you. You know, just highlighting some of the problems here, 40% of all food that we produce basically goes uneaten and is wasted. And when we think about the waste in that, whether it's monetary waste at about $218 billion, or the number of people who are food insecure, who are not able to have access to that waste that goes, there are a lot of issues in terms of how this problem is. And the way the problem breaks down, and it's interesting, is residential waste is about 31%. Farm waste is about 25%, food service waste is about 25%, retail is 10%, manufacturing is only about 6.2%. So it gives you a landscape of where the major contributors are in the food waste space. And again, lots of opportunity to be able to engage the public in these solutions. In terms of the opportunity, we're going to hear a lot about this, but just to take away that food waste is really the nexus of a variety of different fields, and both funders and stakeholders come to food waste from a variety of different perspectives, whether it's climate, and climate is now food waste is now emerging as one of the top solutions to climate change, but also food insecurity, also equity, energy waste, efficiency, when we think of efficiency in a good way. These are all things that we have an opportunity to make significant improvements in, and really in multiple different benefit areas. Next slide, please. You know, so we're really at a tipping point here at the moment, and we've got opportunities that lie ahead, especially with the current change in administration, we will be signing climate accords. We have the UN Sustainable Development Goals that will now sort of come to top of mind. We've got a UN Food Summit in 2021 in September. There are a lot of opportunities, even during this pandemic, which has really put a spotlight on this issue, but also hopefully provided a tipping point in which we can move this issue significantly in the coming years. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next three speakers, who are all from foundations. We have Devin Clattel, who's the Managing Director of the Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation. We have Ida Posner from the Posner Foundation, and Jesse Fink, who is from the Fink Family Foundation. Each of them will give a little introduction here before we get into the main trunk of the webinar. So Devin, take it away.
Sure. Thanks so much, Urvashi. Nice to see everyone. Good afternoon. In terms of the story of the Rockefeller Foundation, how we came to the issue of food loss and waste, Rockefeller, as folks may know, is a global foundation. We'd been working in the space of food and agriculture and food security specifically for about 100 years. And I think about 6 or 7 years ago, really came to the realization that despite sort of a decade of investing in agricultural production, we weren't going to be able to build a food system that could really nourish the world's population if we didn't address the issue of food loss and waste, both here in the US and in markets around the world. So we came to it first from a food security lens. And then I think as we got into the space and we learned from practitioners and experts, you know, including Dana and ReFed and lots of others, we started to see it as driving the sort of multiplicity of impacts that Urvashi just laid out. I used to joke internally that food waste was like the Swiss Army knife of food systems transformation. Like no matter what change you wanted to make in the food system, whether it was around water, land, or equity, or smallholder farmers, or hunger, reducing food waste would probably help you get there. So it really sort of blossomed within our portfolio as something that helped us to address a number of goals that we had. And then the team asked us to speak to sort of one success, and there are so many, honestly, from the last 5 years. So much has happened in this space, but I thought one project I would point to from some of our earlier work that stands out as a success for us is a project called Hotel Kitchen, which some folks might have heard about, where we helped to support the World Wildlife Fund in partnership with the American Hotel and Lodging Association to bring together really most of the world's leading companies in the hospitality space and think about food waste together for the first time, measure it, and then test out a number of solutions over a 12-week pilot. And at the end of those 12 weeks, on our pilot hotel sites, we saw 10 to 38% reduction in food waste, big upticks in food donation and other benefits. And following that project, a number of those hotel chains, Marriott, Hilton, and others made food waste commitments. That program has now scaled to 18 countries all around the world, where the toolkit and sort of conferences are held with the hospitality industry to help introduce them to how to implement solutions and measure food waste in their own operations. So I think that was a great example of bringing together stakeholders to really think as a sort of industry group, as sustainability and culinary leaders, about how to apply some of the solutions that were emerging from the field. And we saw real measurable impact from that work.
Great, thanks so much, Devin. Ida, would you be able to give us your perspective, please?
Absolutely, thanks, Urvashi, and it's great to be here. So we all know that, food waste is this massive problem. And for us at the Posner Foundation, what's really exciting about it is that it's a problem with tangible solutions that we can really implement today. And when I say today, I mean right now, at your next meal. And the impact of reducing food waste extends far beyond the hunger impacts into public health and the environment and the economy. And Urvashi, I really like the way you framed it, that, waste is kind of a hard issue to argue against, right? No one's going to say, yes, I'd really like to waste this. And because it's a topic that touches so many parts of our lives, there are so many entry points and motivations that bring people to the table. And so when I think about success over the past few years at a broad level, I think what we're really seeing is an increase in the awareness and sense of urgency around the issue. And because food waste is so closely tied to a lot of human behaviors, that messaging and motivation is really key to actually, scaling these solutions. And people are really starting to get it. It's in the news, people are talking about it, and we're starting to see champions emerge from a bunch of different sectors. And it's such a complex problem that philanthropy alone isn't going to be able to solve everything, but we can certainly help to create the coalition to get more done. The other trend that we've seen is just better data. And, thanks in large part to ReFED, I think we now have access to data to understand not just the scale of the challenge, but what the high leverage opportunities are. And more specifically, where philanthropy or other stakeholders can reasonably and successfully intervene to actually, again, create action and not just have this be a whiteboard exercise. And the next few years are really critical. We have a few years to hit this goal of 50% reduction by 2030. And I'm personally very optimistic about it. And I think that's another really exciting thing about this topic. These days, it's a pretty overwhelming world we live in. And so to have something where, yes, we can see these solutions, we know we can do it. We just have to get the right people and the right resources in the right place, thinking strategically, bring in new partners and keep that momentum going.
Thank you so much. Jesse, would you share with us a little bit from the Think Family Foundation?
Sure, great. Well, thank you, Urvashi, and thank you, Devin, Ida. It's great to be part of the mini panel with you guys. So I'm here representing the Think Family Foundation. We are a small catalytic foundation that was started by my wife, Betsy, and myself 20 years ago. And our focus has been on environmental issues, climate change, agriculture, sustainable agriculture, food justice. And we owned a small family farm in Connecticut. And after 10 years or so of funding all these different types of great organizations, some who I think are on the call, what we realized is that food waste was an area that actually hit on all of those issues, which has been discussed prior to me. And yet it wasn't an issue unto itself. And so we said, you know what, is there something that we could do that actually would be able to create a roadmap so that other foundations and other philanthropic funders could learn from data and insights and figure out where they might be able to deploy philanthropic capital. Again, a lot of what we do is catalytic. And so we think that philanthropic capital in the food waste sector can really be used to what we use the word de-risk, taking chances that philanthropic funders that should be doing that maybe the government will follow later on, or corporate philanthropy, or even commercial capital or impact capital. So there's a real role for philanthropic capital to come in early and can come in all different stages. I would say we've been involved in many, but I think the creation of ReFED with many people who are on this call as presenters and as attendees, I feel like it's a reunion of a summer camp or a high school. Just there've been so many people who have been on this journey that we've been lucky to be with folks. And the creation of ReFED was really meant to create a big tent, to be able to provide a safe place and information where funders can come and learn from each other and determine where they want to deploy capital. And I remember when we set out to do it, when we went to try to get funding for ReFED, and we went to quite a few large environmental and climate funders. At that point, 6, 7 years ago, food waste was not on their radar. They weren't interested in funding ReFED, but they were interested in reading the report when it was done. So it's exciting to see how far the whole sector of food waste has come, in that we now see small and large, new and old families and foundations realizing that food waste is a solution that can fit within program areas that they are established. And I do think there really is an opportunity to reduce food waste down to the levels that we're all expecting. So thanks for giving me a chance to speak.
Jesse, thank you so much. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, co-sponsors. And now we're going to move on to the second portion of our webinar. And we're going to hear from folks from Project Drawdown, the Atlanta Community Food Bank, Google, and then we're going to hear a little bit from Dana at ReFed. And so our first speaker is Dr. Jonathan Foley. He's the Executive Director of Project Drawdown, and he'll be discussing the prominence of food waste as a climate change mitigator in Drawdown's research. So Jonathan, take it away.
Great. I'm going to share a few slides here myself too to kind of walk you through a little bit of the kind of from a top-down atmosphere point of view. If you start from the atmosphere and you end up at food waste, how does that wiring work and how does it kind of compare to other climate solutions? Just to kind of give a bigger perspective. So let me just show some slides here and take it away. I hope that's working. Is that working? Are we seeing slides? Excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of 2020s, basically, and we have an opportunity now to really address climate change. But to kind of win this game over the next 2 to 3 decades, I like to say, you know, we have to look at the whole board. We really do have to understand how all the pieces are moving in this very complex game, if you will, of addressing climate change, because there are no silver bullets. There's no one piece on the board that's going to win it all. It's a strategy where we have to deploy the right solutions at the right time in the right way together in order to kind of get to checkmate. And when we think about climate change, it is good to kind of start from the atmosphere and ask, where do these gases really come from? And one of the things that really surprises folks is that you look at the different things we do that cause today's climate change. Electricity is about 1/4 of it. Food, agriculture, and land use is tied with that at also about 1/4. So it's interesting, isn't it, that making electricity and making food are the 2 biggest sources of climate change, and they're equal. And what's really astonishing is how much attention is going to the electricity sector, and that's great, but not enough to the food sector. They're incredibly imbalanced. We, of course, have industry making a lot of stuff. We've got transportation moving a lot of stuff. We've got buildings that emit themselves in addition to the electricity they consume and the materials they're made from and everything else. But the food sector deserves a lot of attention because it's kind of an underappreciated part of climate change. It literally is 1/4 of the problem. And a lot of it stems from 3 big things. Deforestation is about 10 of that 24%. Methane, mostly from cattle, a little bit from rice, is about 6% of that 24. And then fertilizers. Nitrous oxide, when we use too much fertilizer or too much manure, the nitrogen in the fertilizer and the manure combines with air and water and outgasses as an N2O, which is another powerful greenhouse gas. So the 3 big levers in the food system are preventing deforestation, being better with animal agriculture and rice, and not using so much fertilizer. Now, when you look at these problems, we traditionally look at the supply side solutions, kind of like we do in electricity. It's really sexy to talk about solar panels and windmills, not so much about energy efficiency, but we need both. The same thing happens with food. It's very sexy to talk about how to grow food better, and we talk about regenerative agriculture and conservation agriculture, agroecology. Yes, 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 absolutely. But where's food efficiency? Just like we have energy efficiency, where's food efficiency? Well, at Project Drawdown, we run the numbers on hundreds of different climate solutions, all using the same methodology. So we can truly compare apples to apples to apples from food, but also to electricity, to industry, to transport, to buildings, and really see, again, the whole chessboard. And if we look at the food sector solutions, what we find is they cluster into 3 big areas. One is kind of food efficiency. Again, food waste is the biggest of all these solutions, but also shifting our diets to a little more plant-rich forms of diets would also be tremendous kind of demand side levers in the food system that help us address climate change. Now compare this to all the other things we can do around agriculture. The second biggest cluster is protecting ecosystems from being cleared, especially forest, and especially forest on top of peatlands, like you see a lot of in Indonesia. And then lastly is farming the lands we already farm a little bit better. This is basically regenerative agriculture and other kind of better management techniques like organic, agroecology, nutrient management. Those are all really important too, but they're dwarfed by the supply side by the demand side levers we see in food waste and diets. The size of these circles, by the way, are proportional to the gigatons of carbon or carbon equivalent that are not emitted over the next 30 years, according to our calculations. And the size of the circle, sometimes there's two circles, an inner one and an outer one. That represents kind of a plausible range. What's interesting is food waste is the single biggest one, and it is probably the one with the least uncertainty to it. Of course, there are a lot of things we could do more. This is a fairly conservative approach to food waste. There's actually more that we can do here, but it's kind of a low-hanging fruit, and I'm sure a lot of you can appreciate that. But I also want to show how all this compares to every other solution to climate change you could put on the table. So when we look at how to fix climate change, there are three things you do. First, you reduce the pollution from the beginning, the sources. The sources come from electricity, food, industry, transport, buildings, and so on. And again, in that food sector, the biggest circle is now combined food waste and dietary change, reducing waste, eating more plants. And if you look across that, other than renewable electricity at the outer rim of possibility, nothing else is bigger than changing what we demand for food by changing food waste and diets. Also, it plays a role in supporting sinks because land not only is an emitter of greenhouse gases in our bad forms of agriculture, if we get around to it and we do it better, we can actually have land become a sink of carbon. And again, food waste turns out to be important here as well. If we can spare more land to be in like regenerative agriculture, or better yet, restored back to nature, we can create new carbon sinks on land in addition. So food waste both has kind of a lever to play in terms of reducing emissions from the ag sector, but potentially increasing sinks on land. And I'm not even mentioning right now the avoided methane emissions we would see in industry because there's less stuff going to the landfill. So food waste really is kind of shows up in three different places here, and we don't even take all that into account, but it's incredibly important. We also have another lever for climate change is things like improving access to health and education, especially for women and girls, showing that that also bends the curve on future population growth and things like this in ways that are better for society for many, many reasons. But when we look at it all together, I know this is a hard diagram to see, but this is all of the climate solutions we've looked at, looking at the ones that reduce the primary sources of greenhouse gases, the ones that enhance sinks of greenhouse gases, and the ones that transform society in better ways as well. And we see in that green sector that the biggest one there is food waste, and it's almost as big as like all the world's solar energy or wind or anything else. So I would love to see food waste brought up to the same level of discourse as solar energy, wind turbines, batteries, electric cars, because it's in the same neighborhood of being one of the biggest levers we can pull on climate change writ large. Not to mention all the co-benefits for food security, biodiversity, watersheds, water pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what's really great is that when we deploy all those solutions I just showed you, all of which exist today, none of those are new technologies. They're just scaling up what we already know how to do. We can change the world. We can win this chess game. The red curve is kind of what might happen to the atmosphere based on our current trajectory, but we can do this. We can bend the curve, so to speak. The yellow and the green curves show two different scenarios where we get to what we call the moment of drawdown, when greenhouse gases stabilize, and that's when we stop climate change. And if we do that, with food waste being one of the leading ways going forward, we can stop climate change as early as the mid-2040s through into the 2060s. All of those choices are possible. And those correspond to basically two different kind of targets for the world. The red curve, we don't want to go there, but the yellow and the green correspond to a 2-degree warmer than normal world, or a 1.5-degree kind of extreme Paris target, which we can still achieve. But we will not get there if we only focus on the energy sector, or we only focus on electricity, industry, buildings, and so on. We have to talk about food. It's a quarter of the problem. And the biggest solution there by far is food waste, tailed by dietary change, and those could be linked together, as well as all the other benefits it has throughout the climate system, but also more broadly. And if anybody wants to learn more about how we do this or how this kind of solutions play out in different ways, come visit us at drawdown.org, and hope we can see you there. Maybe we can be helpful. So I'll stop there.
Great, Jonathan, thank you so much. What amazing visuals that really encapsulate so much information in so many short slides.
Well, I'd be happy to share those too. I can email them to you as long as they're not,
That would be terrific.
you know, as a PDF or something, if you'd like
Great.
them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure that ReFed will be happy to hand them on to all of the attendees. Next, we're going to hear from Stacy Green Conkey, who's the Chief Operations Officer at the Atlanta Community Food Bank. Stacy, all set?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be here today. And I think the one thing I will say is that if anyone was surprised and not familiar with the issue of food insecurity, the last 8 months have, I think, put it in front of everyone in a very clear and present way, and how much food insecurity affects the wider world and certainly across the United States. There's some great facts presented earlier around the number of meals that could be provided to food insecure individuals if we were to only deal with 20% of the waste that's currently generated. But I'll also share a couple of statistics that more around the Georgia and Atlanta area. These facts are a little different across the US, but in this area, about 1 in 5 children are food insecure. And that's not 1 in 5 low-income children, that's 1 in 5 children. And about 1 in 8 seniors are food insecure across the state of Georgia. And those numbers are very similar across every state and every area in the United States. So historically, food banks have been considered part of the solution for food waste in order to help with food insecurity. And most of that has been focused on dealing with waste from overproduction in manufacturing, overproduction in inventory management practices and distribution. But as industry continues to improve and optimize itself, those sources of waste reduce, which is great for industry. Does put some forms of stress on food banking in general, but those things we've been preparing for in the food banking world and have continued to move in looking for where are the other sources of waste where we can tap into. Things like, and being more what would be considered food rescue, of more fresh and prepared foods or perishable foods from retail and grocery stores, and how do we get those and take that waste from those parts of the industry and help to resolve food insecurity. But I think the other thing that's coming to, I guess, being seen in front of folks is the waste that happens in farming. And you may have seen pictures of milk being dumped and crops being plowed under because there was no place for those items to go as restaurants shut down. But the reality is that those things happen even before the pandemic started, because there is food waste from farming that happens every day because of various farming practices, because of our trade policy, because of farming subsidies that actually either encourage overproduction or encourage growing things that cannot be used fully, or encourage production into forms of food that are actually not easily usable by consumers. The Farm Bill is something that food banks actually benefit from, the overproduction of food, where some of the excess production from that is subsidized through the Farm Bill comes through to food banks for support of individuals who are food insecure. So all of those things are ways that food banks play a role in helping deal with food waste and also reducing food insecurity. Now, where is the opportunity going forward? Now, we don't want, of course, to encourage more overproduction in manufacturing distribution. We want to continue to see the optimization of inventory management and production practices. So we look both upstream and downstream for how we can better utilize the existing waste that's there to help deal with food insecurity. Upstream, the one thing that's been most important or very important right now has been the knowledge of and increased knowledge of what food insecurity looks like and the issues regarding food insecurity that's come more into the forefront. Knowledge has been power. Knowledge is very important to help people see that food insecurity does not live in a city, does not live in a particular area. Food insecurity is everywhere. We just don't always see it. The problem is that those sources of waste that can be used to deal with food insecurity aren't everywhere. And one of the issues is, how do we get those wasted products into the hands and into the format in a way that the food insecure individuals can use? So some of the things we've been thinking of and trying to work on is, how do we get the fresh food from the farm to the food bank, from the farm to the individual? How do we get those items that need to be refrigerated or are perishable into the food bank, into the community agency, into the hands of the clients? All of those things require refrigerated and frozen transportation. That's one of the biggest opportunities for dealing with food waste and turning it into a solution for food insecure. It's those last mile issues that everyone talks about. And the very expensive refrigerated transportation and the very expensive refrigerated storage are the solutions that we continue to look for, as well as being more opportunistic in those near-term, short shelf life, perishable items that we only have less than 5 days to get from one place to the other. So we definitely want to make sure that people understand how food banks play a role in the food waste stream. And we have always been playing that role in handling what's been considered waste to deal with food insecurity. And our opportunity is really to think about, do we just look at the farm waste? Or do we also think about some interim steps? Because where we want to get to everyone getting fresh food, that's not always the ideal solution. And sometimes we go to whether the ideal fresh food versus the less ideal solution of a canned product or processed product, where we think, well, that's not the right way to deal with the waste. But a low sodium, no sodium processed tomato is better than ketchup on a French fry. And so there's always the interim solution that we also need to think about, because the solutions to deal with fresh food and getting that into the hands of the food banks, into the community agency, or into the hands of the clients are a very expensive solution that we have been dealing with for the last decade or so, as fresh food becomes a greater waste stream that we are trying to tap into. And now we need to look at, where's that interim solution? So that's how food banks tie into the waste stream, and how waste is helping, we're utilizing the food waste to help deal with food insecurity.
Stacy, thank you so much. You know, and I just to make the note that so many that are food insecure are also some of the ones who are the most vulnerable to climate change. So these issues and these problems sort of weave their way away and then together again in many interesting ways. Next on deck, we have Emily Ma, who works for X, which is part of the parent company at Google and is food systems lead at Google. She's going to share a little bit about the corporate experience in this sector, as well as how technology is being used to make some advances in this space. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Urvashi, thank you so much for having me today. So just a little bit of background to start with before diving into our role internally as well as external facing around food waste. Google Food is the organization within Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, that basically provides all of us Googlers with food every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that program has been really core to our culture since the first day we started in 22 years ago. Our founders made an investment in its staff, believing that good, healthy, nutritious food would strategically actually enable the staff to be more creative, more productive, and happy in the long term. So over 22 years, that's grown to a mid-sized food service company, kind of shoved into a tech company is how we kind of describe it. We have hundreds of cafes operating in 40 different countries. And every day pre-COVID, that the Google Food team was producing over 300,000 meals a day with our food service partners. But what's more important is actually the philosophy that drives that operation, that massive operation. Number one, we are very focused on caring for those who we feed, meaning individuals like myself and my colleagues. Second pillar is we care for those who feed us. So it's not just about delivering the best meal. It's about how do we take care of our kitchen staff, our operators, everyone, the thousands of people who are toiling away to put food on our plates every day. They do an incredible job. And then finally, even more extensively, we are very thoughtful and intentional about what that operation inside our business means for the environment and the society around us. And it's really in that last pillar that we started to focus on food waste and food insecurity in our cafes and our communities a number of years ago. So if I dive in, if we go to the first slide, my colleague Kristen Rainey many years ago started looking at food waste in our kitchens, our hundreds of cafes and kitchens, and we learned some things along the way. So I'll go through 4 quick things that I think are applicable across corporate food programs all over the world. The first thing is we do use technology to cut back on our waste. So, our friends at LeanPath, I know they are an advisor to ReFed, really enabled us about 5 years ago to start properly measuring, what we were putting in the compost or trash can and what we were not utilizing. And that you get what you measure, right? And then only when you measure can you tackle something like the food efficiency ratio that I know that Jonathan had spoken about earlier. So we were able to improve that significantly over the years, saving millions of pounds of food that would have otherwise ended up in compost. We just started producing less of it at the right time at the right place. Just a quick note about LeanPath. What you're seeing is that an operator at the end of the day would take all the excess food, and take a picture of it, log it, and then measure and weigh it. And then every week, the kitchen teams would get together and debrief on what they could do better. And just simply things like trim waste, right? How do you get all the cantaloupe off of the skin, the rind, makes a difference in the long term. Let's go to the next one. So we also think a lot about the ingredients that we get through our food service providers. Maisie Gansler from Bon Appetit, a shout out to her, really pioneered a lot of this stuff and taught us that even if this yam doesn't look great, it probably tastes pretty good. So once it's been prepared appropriately, who cares what it looks like? Green onions is another one, right? Green onions, you wonder why when you get it from the grocery store, it's only 12 inches long. They actually grow to 3 feet long, and we just want to use the whole product. So why would you chop off, so much good product when you could use it? It turns out that the packaging is actually really important. Standardization is really important. We also work with new supplies, right? So coffee flour is now a main ingredient in a lot of our baked goods. It comes from the coffee cherry that if you dry it, turns out to be a great flour for muffins and other pastries. And then finally, another example here is we really consider root to stem, right? So we buy the whole carrot, right? Rather than just the carrot itself, we use the stem for pestos and other types of sauces and ingredients in our menu planning. The third thing is that we also continue to be very creative and unconventional in the kitchen. So sometimes when you look at something that might go to waste, like kale stems or strawberries that are a little far ripe, or avocados that have gone brown, you could put those stems into smoothies, which we've served to our staff and they love it. I've never had a pickled strawberry until I was at Google, and I realized that when you pickle strawberries, it's a totally different flavor profile and it's wonderful. And it turns out that browned avocados, you blend it in the food processor with cacao, you get a chocolate mousse. So, our staff, very experimental and willing to try these new things. And I've adopted a lot of these recipes in this home as a result of learning about them at work. The second and third thing under this category is that we think about process very differently as well. We do batch cooking rather than preparing for 1,000 people all up front. We do batch cooking based on what we see day to day and then hour by hour. And then the third one is we've moved towards less buffet and more plated presentation, because that has significantly reduced the post-consumer food waste in our cafes. And then finally, if we go to the last slide, this is sort of going back to the first point. We don't toss things just in the garbage. We really try to measure it first. and then donate where possible, and then move to compost rather than landfill. So that's taken a lot of behavioral change and training of our thousands of kitchen staff in the last couple of years. So I'm going to move on to a few other topics that I know we wanted to cover here, including what is the role of corporations and what is the role of technology in this space? And then finally, why is circularity and sustainability important to Google? So corporations are important in my opinion, because many of us spend time in the office. And as I noted, I would have never eaten pickled strawberries until somebody told me that I could, and I tried it and it was wonderful. So corporations have a role with food service companies to inspire, support, and encourage good habits at home. Technology also plays a role. As a technologist, I will say it is not the solution. We have a role, we have a contribution to make, but we are not the solution. We have so much to learn from operators, from scientists, from all of you in terms of what we could do. But I will say the one opportunity I see that's really prominent with technology is that the folks I have met on the ground working with food waste, whether it's the kitchen staff member, whether it's the farmer, they don't have an extra hour in their day to gather data and make sense of it. They're already working 14-hour days. That's where technology can make that frictionless, whether it's sensors, cloud computing, machine learning, and other tools. We can actually gather the data that we need to make better decisions about our food waste nationally and globally without adding more tasks to those who are feeding us, so to speak. Circularity and sustainability have increasingly become very important topics for Google. We've been committed for many years to getting to zero waste, to getting to a sustainable sort of zero emissions targets for our own operations. And at the end of the day, if I think about it, we've always wanted to become a more helpful organization to all those we serve, whether it's the consumer or the enterprise. And what we've noticed is with a lot of our big customers, whether it's on the advertising side or the cloud side, sustainability has become increasingly more important. So as we learn new ways of doing things better inside our own organization, we want to be able to share that out. And with the tools that we have, with the learnings that we have, we want to enable everyone that we work with to achieve their own circularity and sustainability goals. Thank you.
Emily, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to take us next to Dana Gunders from ReFed, and I want to just encourage all of you to continue to ask your questions in the chat, and we will start some questions after Dana finishes, and whatever we don't get to, we'll make sure that we get back to you with answers on them post-webinar. But if you do have questions, please go ahead and enter them. Dana, take it away, please.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. It's really great to be here. So many things I want to tell you, but I'll keep it pretty quick here. And really wanted to start off with a little conversation about what's happened this year. So some of you here are new to the topic, but I know some of you have been involved for quite a while and are probably wondering what the heck happened in 2020. So I kind of wanted to start there and give a few updates. First of all, I wanted to take the opportunity to put the word great and 2020 in the same line, because this is probably the only place you will see that anywhere. And my first opportunity to do that. But in fact, 2020 was a bottom line, like a fascinating year for food waste. Not all positive by any means, but just sort of starting at the bottom of this slide, COVID really shined an enormous spotlight on this issue. I mean, not in a long time had we seen front page New York Times articles of just mountains of food going to waste, milk being dumped, as Stacy mentioned, and that really, I think, got people thinking in a new way about it, and in a new way about just food systems and food supply chains. So we have seen an openness at the same time where businesses are being forced to change what they're doing. And so, as Emily just mentioned about buffets versus plated, I mean, the buffet, who knows if we're ever going to see a buffet again? And frankly, from a food waste perspective, that wouldn't be such a bad thing, as they are notorious for having a lot of food go to waste. And so we saw all sorts of changes that businesses and people at home were making that are actually pretty promising in the long run to lead to less waste. So while we saw a huge spike when the economy initially shut down, we have seen some semblance of balance be restored. And in that new restoration, we're seeing restaurants have smaller menus, no more all you can eat. We're seeing people in their homes cooking more, learning kitchen skills and food management skills, as well as having more predictable schedules, which are all helping reduce waste. And in fact, about 36% of people, shoppers or consumers, have reported that they believe they're wasting less now since the pandemic hit. So just a little note there. So kind of an interesting twist that it's created. At the same time, we've seen, projects that were already in the works continue to move along. And I think one place we've seen a lot of progress is on business commitments. So over 200 businesses have made some kind of commitment this year. Some of that has come from a project called 10 by 20 by 30, which had 10 of the large suppliers around the world invite 20 of their largest suppliers to make a commitment to reducing their food waste by 50% by 2030. In addition, we have the Pacific Coast Collaborative on the West Coast, which is actively the first public-private partnership in the US, and has 6 retailers who have signed on as signatories with commitments to reporting and making progress on the issue. And then we have new companies like Amazon who have joined the USDA in their kind of commitment platform. So a lot of people saying that they're going to do stuff, which is a great start. We've also seen, in policy land, New Jersey became the 7th state to enact some kind of ban on sending food to landfills. So we're seeing momentum pick up on those types of policies. We had our first trade association created, the Upcycled Food Association, that has over 100 members already of businesses that are taking byproducts or food that otherwise would not have been used and creating food products out of them. And we are actually seeing some progress being reported, not here in the US, but in the UK, they've actually reached a 27% reduction from the baseline they set in, I think it's 2008. And so they're actually halfway towards their 50% reduction goal there. It's nice to see that that's possible. Here in the US, we've had Kroger come out announcing they've reduced the amount of food waste that they're generating by 13% in the last 2 years, Campbell's by 36% in the last 2 years, and then companies like Sodexo, who have rolled out waste tracking to 3,000 different companies out there. I'm sorry, sites out there. So we're certainly seeing some activity. Next slide, please. For us, during that whole COVID period, what we saw was this huge spike in food available to be rescued and would otherwise go to waste, and then a huge increase in need, as Stacey talked about. So, our response was to, for the first time as ReFed, actually create our own fund. It was a relief fund, 100% re-granted. And we wound up, in short order, raising about $3.5 million and granting that to 37 different grantees, ultimately saving about 80 million pounds of food. I think what was interesting about this is, we learned a few things from this. One is that there's a lot of good small organizations doing just amazing work on the ground, and bigger donors who don't necessarily have the time to research and figure out who they are. And so that sort of middleman of a fund who was able to disperse that money kind of knowledgeably into vetted organizations was true value add to the situation. Another thing we learned is that our grantees did best when we helped them beyond just giving them money. And so we played a strong role in helping them network, connect with other donors, connect with other companies, connect the moving truck, the people who are donating their moving trucks with the people who needed the food moved. And so, being able to play a more active role and really making those connections was true value add. And the third part of that was having a communication strategy that really helped elevate the work those grantees were doing and thereby help them find other connections through more higher profiles. Next slide, please. Looking forward to 2021, we at ReFed have really been focusing on not just on 2021, but like, how do we get to this 2030 goal? There is a goal out there and it's international and it's national and companies have signed on to cut food waste in half by 2030. But like, how do we actually do that? And we've really been trying to put some pen to paper to figure that out. And we have come up with these 7 priority areas. And what I'm showing you is kind of a little bit of a sneak preview to something that we are launching in January. And we'll certainly be reaching back out to tell you more about it then. But we're really seeing that most of what needs to be done falls into these 7 categories. And specifically, and certainly if you're someone who prioritizes climate change as an issue, really looking at how do we stop the waste from happening in the first place, or rather the waste, how do we even stop the surplus? How do we really drive that efficiency? And so we've really tried to articulate that in a new way with our roadmap. And that's why you see that first 5 really anchoring on the prevention side of the issue. Next slide, please. Along with our roadmap, we are launching something we're calling the ReFed Insights Engine. And we have spent all year doing analysis to really try to take what we know and put it all together in one place where people can learn about it. As Emily said, data is really challenging on this topic. And as I so jealously watched John's amazing presentation, it really hits home for me that like when you have that type of analysis, you can figure out where to focus. And I think that's really our goal, is to help people figure out where they themselves can focus, whoever they are, and not overwhelm them with the topic. But rather show them where they can act and where it's going to make the biggest difference. So our Insights Engine uses over 50 data sets and all sorts of calculations and expert opinions, et cetera, to come out with the best that we know of in terms of information on this topic right now. And we have a whole section that is categorizing the amount of food that's going to waste with all sorts of ways to dive into more granularity and different types of impact analyses. If you go to the next slide, we also have a whole solutions analysis. We've analyzed over 40 solutions for how much food they can save, how much they cost to implement, how much they save in dollars when implemented, and come out with a set of information where you can kind of tell us who you are. It's very customizable. We really want people to get to the information relevant to them quickly. And part of that, we've also looked at capital providers, because we see capital providers as a really important lever in this whole matrix. And if you go to the next page, so for each of our solutions, for instance, we've conducted an analysis, not only of how much can this solution do, how much is it going to cost to do it, but then also where should that money be coming from? Like, what is the most likely source of that investment? And so you can see on the right there, for each solution, we've actually analyzed, how much philanthropic money is appropriate, as well as impact investment and government grants too. And we will, I don't have a screenshot of it here, but we'll be pulling that all together into sort of a condensed set of guidance for both private investors and philanthropic capital providers. So please stay tuned for that coming up in January. We'll be in touch. And with that, I will stop to give us just at least a couple minutes for questions.
Great, Dana, thank you so much. I love looking at the ReFed website, and I don't love lots of websites. You do really digest things so well for people. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so why don't we get right to them? And I'll just read them out for those maybe who are on the phone as well. And this first question You know, any of the panelists, you can feel free to answer, but I think this first question, probably Stacy and Dana, I'm guessing would be the right ones to answer it. So I'll just read it quickly for those who can't see it. This is from Andy Chen. I've always been interested in how reducing food loss or waste in retail or agriculture changes food accessibility at the consumer level. Food recovery directly feeds people, but I'm less clear how much reducing food loss earlier in the chain can address food insecurity. I've always assumed that we could reduce prices for fresh produce, for instance, but I'm not sure by how much. So Stacy, would you like to take the first swat at that answer? And then Dana, if you have anything to add, or any of the other panelists, jump in after.
Sure. You know, it is a bit of a paradox. You know, reducing food waste can mean, well, there's less food for the food bank kind of network to use to address food insecurity. But we also don't want to create food waste. But I would just challenge us also to think about how we think of food waste isn't just things we may throw away, but it's the inevitable overproduction, especially upstream at the farms, because again, not only related to policy, but you know, from a great farmer, there's times that, you know, the sun's going to shine fabulously and I'm just going to have a fabulous yield. The question is, so what do we do with the excess food? Excess food isn't waste until we can't find a way to do something with it. And so the issue becomes, even though there's excess, it's only wasted if we don't have a way to get it to people who can then use it. And so reducing that waste isn't necessarily going to always reduce access, because the reality is we don't control the weather, we don't control the yields of farms, we don't control how much milk a cow is going to produce. So there's never going to be the perfect supply demand at that upstream side of food production. And so the challenge is, for whatever amount of excess is produced, how do we have it not be wasted, but turn it into something that can be usable? The other side of this coin is that we should not be expecting food overproduction or food waste to be how we feed people. We need to, those two things are linked. But there is a larger philosophical discussion about how people in need should be fed.
Stacy, thank you so much. It's a really complete answer. Dana, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that last point Stacy made is kind of mine as well, which is, you know, we need to consider feeding people directly and not just sort of with the dregs of the food system because we're sloppy about how we operate, right? And so I think in my mind, the goal is to have a food system that is so efficient, we actually don't have food to donate. And then we really care for people who need additional food directly. And we already have programs to do that.
Thanks, Dana. The second question on deck was a little bit like the first question. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to push on because we're at the top of the hour. So the third question, I think, Dana, is also for you, which is from Chuck Wolf. I went to a program 4 years ago and got a very nice document from ReFed called A Roadmap to Reduce U.S. Food Waste by 20%. Are we any closer to the goal now than we were before? How much difference is there at this point in what the roadmap looks like?
I love that question because mostly I want to say come back in January and I will have an excellent answer for you. In the meantime, I can say, you know, that roadmap report that ReFed put out in 2016 had amazing traction, and we have heard, I mean, last week I was on the phone with the Turkish Ministry of Ag saying, we use your roadmap to make our, you know, our national plan or whatnot. So we know that people are looking at it and we know they're using it. In terms of pointing to kind of specific progress, I think probably the best thing to point to is the standardized date labels specifically, which has made a lot of progress since that report came out and was kind of one of the top things on the list. And since that report came out, the industry has really adopted a voluntary standard around it and is making progress, and I think we'll be there soon. Overall, I think it's still a little TBD with poor data. We're still crunching our last numbers. So like I said, come visit us in January and we will have a well-informed answer to that question.
Dana, thank you so much. Well, what a great panel. You all have provided so much information, and I want to again thank the co-sponsors for this, including Rockefeller, Boundless, the Kroger Zero Hunger Zero Waste Foundation, and the Fink Family Foundation. I know we were all incredibly excited to present this webinar to you. We have such a great attendance on this webinar at well over 50 people, which is super exciting. And I know that everyone on the panel would be more than happy to answer questions going forward. And getting in touch with Nicole or Dana would be the best way to shuttle your questions to anybody and get some answers that you're looking for. So I want to thank everybody for their time, and to all the panelists for all their great expertise and sharing that with us, and hope everybody has a really wonderful day. Thank you.